packed her bags, took Clara and Henry by the hand, and walked out without looking back. Friends who once crowded around my table for barbecues stopped answering my calls, and my own brother Ezra, the one I trusted most, stared me in the eye and said, "You're nothing but a worthless failure. You've shamed our family." I thought the humiliation couldn't cut deeper, but 2 weeks later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something in me answered. A voice, low and unfamiliar, spoke one sentence that froze the blood in my veins. "Check under your father's grave. There's a box with your name on it." That night, with my hands trembling and my chest tight with dread, I carried a shovel into the cemetery. I dug through the cold earth until metal struck wood. My heart slammed against my ribs as I brushed the dirt away. The lid of the box was carved with one word: Calvin. My name is Calvin Mercer. I'm 42 years old, and until last year I thought I had built a life that could not be shaken. For 15 years, I ran a lumber mill in the town of Stoneford, a place where everyone knows your name, and reputation carries more weight than money in the bank. I was proud of the mill, not just because it put food on my table, but because it carried my father's legacy. Raymond Mercer had worked these woods before me, his hands rough from the saws, his back bent from the weight of labor. He taught me early that a man's worth was tied to how hard he worked and how well he provided. For a long time, I believed I was living up to that lesson. But when the economy shifted, when orders slowed, and when debts started to pile up, the walls began to close in. First, it was one missed payment, then another, then angry calls from suppliers who had once called me a friend. I tried everything, cutting costs, working longer hours, even selling off equipment, but it was like trying to stop a flood with my bare hands. The mill that had once buzzed with the sound of saws and men calling out over the machines grew quieter each week, until one day it fell silent altogether. That silence broke me more than the final notice pinned to my door. Walking through those empty rooms, seeing dust settle where sweat and work once thrived, I felt like I had failed not only myself, but every man who had swung an axe beside me. At home, the collapse carried heavier weight. My wife, Nora, had been my high school sweetheart. She had stood by me through years when money was tight and the mill demanded every ounce of me. But when the check stopped, when I came home carrying not pride but defeat, something in her shifted. She looked at me differently, as though I had shrunk before her eyes. One night, she stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, the children asleep in their rooms. "Calvin, the children need stability," she said, her voice steady, but colder than I had ever heard it. "They need a roof that will not be taken away, food that will not run out. Right now, you are giving them despair. I cannot let them live in this shadow." I begged her to hold on, told her I would find another way, but she had already made her choice. A week later, she packed Clara's dresses and Henry's toy trucks into bags, loaded the car, and drove away. The taillights disappeared into the distance while I stood on the porch, unable to breathe. My children's faces pressed against the window haunt me still. Clara looked confused, Henry looked scared, and both of them looked at me as though I should stop it, but I could not. Losing the mill was like losing a part of myself. Losing them was like losing my soul. I thought family would rally around me, but the truth of hard times is that they reveal more than prosperity ever will. My younger brother Ezra had always been restless, always convinced he could do better than me, though he never put in the hours to prove it. When the mill fell, he did not offer comfort. He came to my house, stood in my kitchen and shook his head. "You've ruined everything Dad built," he said. "You're nothing but a worthless failure." The words struck me harder than any debt collector's call. Ezra's eyes carried no pity, only judgment. He left me standing there with those words lodged in my chest, words I could not shake no matter how I tried. My mother, Eveline, did her best to console me. She is a gentle woman, her hands worn from years of cooking and cleaning, her frame small but unyielding. She would sit across from me at the kitchen table, her tea steaming between us, and remind me that storms pass. "Your father believed in you, Calvin," she said. "He might not have shown it the way you wanted, but he was proud. You must not let this moment define you forever." Her words were kind, but they could not silence the fear that screamed inside me. Each day I woke with the weight of failure pressing against my chest. Each night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man I was if I could not keep my family together, if I could not protect the legacy I had inherited. The town that once respected me turned its back as well. Men I had lent money to, neighbors whose homes I had helped repair, now crossed the street rather than meet my eyes. At the diner, I felt whispers crawl across the room like smoke. I had been the man who provided jobs, who carried weight with pride. Now, I was the man who had lost it all, the man people spoke about in hushed tones as though failure might be contagious. I tried to hold on to what little remained. I kept the old truck running, though barely, and walked through the mill grounds as though my presence could bring life back to its hollow bones, but the emptiness only deepened. The silence of those grounds mirrored the silence in my home, where laughter once filled the rooms and now only dust settled on the furniture. It was in that emptiness that my mind began to drift to my father. Raymond Mercer had been a stern man, never one to coddle, but he carried strength that others leaned on. He was buried on the hill at the edge of town, beneath an oak tree that had stood longer than any Mercer had lived. I visited his grave often, speaking words I wished I had said when he was alive. I asked him what I should do, where I should go, and why he had left me without guidance when I needed it most. I never expected an answer. But 2 weeks after Nora left, when my brother's words still burned in my ears and the shame of the town pressed on my shoulders, the phone rang. A number I did not recognize flashed across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Calvin Mercer," the voice said, cold and unfamiliar. "Check under your father's grave. There's a box with your name on it." The words from that phone call echoed inside me long after the line went dead. "Check under your father's grave. There's a box with your name on it." I sat in the kitchen, staring at the phone, the silence of the house pressing down on me. Who would say such a thing? Who would know my father well enough to use his grave as a weapon against me? At first, I convinced myself it had to be a cruel prank. Ezra's voice haunted me. It sounded nothing like him, but the bitterness he carried toward me made him the most obvious suspect. It would not surprise me if he wanted to twist the knife deeper, to see me break even further. The thought filled me with anger, but also with fear. I drove to my mother's house that evening. Evelyn sat by the window, knitting in her chair, her eyes weary yet full of a quiet strength that had held our family together long after my father was gone. I told her about the call, about the voice, about the message I had been given. She listened without interrupting, her hands still moving the needles, the rhythm steady against my rising tension. When I finished, she placed the knitting in her lap and met my eyes. "Your father carried secrets, Calvin," she said carefully. "Not all of them were meant for you. He was a hard man, but he was not cruel. If something was buried, it was because he believed it should be left alone." Her words rattled me. My father had been private, stern, and sometimes distant, but I never imagined he carried secrets to his grave. I pressed her for more, but she shook her head and told me to leave the dead in peace. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house felt emptier than ever. I pictured Nora tucking Clara and Henry into bed somewhere far away from me. I heard Ezra's voice again, calling me worthless. I thought of my father, standing over me as a boy, his hands guiding mine on an axe handle.